Tonight we venture into shadows that linger where few dare to tread. These are not just stories to comfort, but echoes of spirits that refuse to rest. Do you believe the dead are bound to the past, or do they still walk beside us in the present? Share your thoughts, and together, let's descend into the whispers of the unknown. The Sahara is a place that seems endless, a sea of sand stretching far beyond the horizon, a place where silence becomes so heavy it feels alive. To step into its heart is to step into another world, one where time slows and the line between reality and illusion begins to blur. But for those who have crossed it, the Sahara is not silent at all. It whispers, it remembers, and its voice is carried on the wind. Caravans that once moved through this desert have left more than tracks in the sand. They left behind fear, hunger, exhaustion, and sometimes death. It is said that when the sun sets and the desert cools, travelers can still hear the soft shuffle of camels moving across dunes that should be empty, the faint tinkling of bells carried on invisible air, the clatter of leather straps, and the hushed voices of men long gone. Some believe these are mirages of sound, the desert playing tricks on weary minds. Others insist they are ghosts, forever walking the endless paths they once knew. Among the most haunting legends are those of the blue men of the desert. The Tuareg people earned this name from the indigo dye of their robes, which stained their skin and gave them an almost otherworldly presence beneath the sun. But in the stories told at firelight, the blue men take on a darker form. Travelers have spoken of figures draped in deep blue appearing at dusk on distant ridges, motionless against the sinking sun. When approached, they vanish, leaving only shifting sand. Some claim these apparitions are spirits of Tuareg warriors who died defending their caravans from raiders. Others whisper that they are guardians of forbidden routes, warning the living not to trespass into cursed places. There is an old tale of a French legionnaire patrol lost in the Sahara in the early 20th century. Their supply line was cut, and the men vanished without a trace. Weeks later, a rescue party found their bodies in the sand, positioned as if they were still marching. Since then, countless travelers have reported seeing uniformed soldiers walking in single file along the horizon, their outlines blurred as if they are swallowed by the heat. No sound accompanies them, only the crushing silence of the deserts, until suddenly the entire column disappears into nothingness. But perhaps the most unsettling stories come not from sight, but from sound. The Sahara is known for its strange natural phenomena, like the singing dunes, where sand, shifting under the wind, creates deep, eerie tones. Yet there are accounts of voices carried in those tones. At night, wanderers hear murmurs in languages they cannot identify, whispers rising and falling as though in conversation. Some swear they hear their own names called, soft and insistent, from the darkness. Others have followed those voices only to find themselves hopelessly lost, led deeper into the desert's heart. Mirages in the Sahara are legendary, but not all are tricks of light. A merchant once claimed he saw an entire caravan ahead of him, a procession of camels, riders, and banners moving steadily across. He hurried to catch them, desperate for companionship in the endless waste. But as he drew closer, the figures dissolved into air, leaving only untouched sand before him. Exhausted, he collapsed and nearly perished in the heat. When he awoke at night, he swore he heard laughter echoing across the dunes, though there was no one around him. The desert has a way of holding on to suffering, and perhaps that is why so many believe it to be haunted. The bones of countless travelers lie hidden beneath its shifting surface. Ancient trade routes, swallowed by sand, conceal entire caravans, lost cities, and forgotten wars. The Sahara is a graveyard without headstones, and in its silence, those who perished seem to cry out for recognition. One of the most chilling tales comes from near the Tanis Road, the land of thirst, a desolate stretch feared even by seasoned travelers. A small group of explorers once camped there, and during the night, they were awakened by the sound of footsteps circling their tents. At first, they believed it was raiders, but when they peered out, they saw no one. The sounds continued, slow and deliberate, tracing the sand around their camp. Then came the whispering, voices that seemed to press against the fabric of their tents, urging them to come outside. None dared to move until dawn, and when the light rose, the sand around their camp was unmarked, as if no feet had ever touched it. Even today, modern travelers crossing the Sahara in jeeps or on foot report strange experiences. Engines stall without reason, only to roar back to life hours later. GPS devices glitch, showing impossible coordinates. At night, shapes flicker just beyond the glow of campfires, lingering long enough for the human eye to doubt itself. Some claim the desert itself is alive, a vast, endless being that watches and tests all who dare to cross it. The whispers of the Sahara remind us that emptiness is never truly empty. In a land so vast, silence itself becomes a presence, and within that presence, the memories of the dead take form. They walk in the shifting sands, they ride with phantom caravans, and they speak in voices woven into the wind. Those who listen too closely may find themselves drawn into that chorus, lost to the desert, like so many before them. As the sun dips below the horizon, the Sahara undergoes a transformation. The blazing heat collapses into a bitter cold, and the desert takes on a new personality. Shadows stretch far across the dunes, and the silence feels heavier, almost expectant, as if the desert is holding its breath. Many who have camped there say that this is the hour when the unseen stir. There are stories, lights that wander across the sands, flickering like lanterns carried by invisible hands. At first, they appear faint, almost harmless, like fireflies against the vast dark. But as they draw closer, they burn brighter, too steady to be natural. Those who chase after them often find nothing waiting, only cold sand beneath their feet. Yet when they turn back toward camp, they discover the lights have reappeared behind them, following, keeping pace, like ghostly guides or predators waiting for the right moment. Local Bedouins warn never to pursue such lights. They say the desert itself tests the arrogance of men, luring them from their companions until they are hopelessly lost. The lights, they claim, are the souls of wanderers who perished in thirst, cursed to draw others into the same fate. It is not uncommon for entire expeditions to lose members this way. A single man vanishing during the night, with no trace left but footprints that stop abruptly in the sand. Then there are the storms. Sandstorms can rise without warning, and within them, voices are said to dwell. Travelers caught in the storm often report hearing cries carried in the rushing wind, voices desperate and broken, begging for water or mercy. Some claim to have heard the wails of children, sharp and piercing, cutting through the roar of the storm. Others have described laughter a hollow, mocking sound that seems to circle around them as they stumble blindly through the choking air. When the storm clears, the desert lies silent again, as if nothing ever happened. But those who survive rarely forget the sounds they heard. The Tuareg themselves speak of a place they call the Valley of Ghosts, a stretch of desert where countless caravans are said to have vanished. By day, it looks no different from any other dune. By night, the valley comes alive with phantoms. Camels groaning beneath invisible loads, merchants shouting in languages lost to time, even the clatter of weapons clashing in the dark. The living are warned not to camp there, for those who do are said to wake in the morning with sand filling their lungs, as though the desert itself tried to bury them alive. There is another story whispered between guides about a well hidden deep in the desert. Water in such a place should be salvation, but those who drink from this well do not return. According to legend, the water is guarded by the spirits of a tribe who died of thirst, watching over it with eternal jealousy. Travelers who claim to have stumbled across the well describe hearing voices rising from the depths before any water is drawn. Some insist that a pale hand, skeletal and cracked from the heat, reached out from the darkness to grip their bucket, holding it fast until they fled in terror. The well is never in the same place twice, as though it moves with the shifting sands, waiting for the desperate to find it. Stranger still are the apparitions that appear not as men or caravans, but as entire cities. There are reports of travelers seeing towers rising in the distance, walls gleaming in the dying sun, the shape of domes and gates on the horizon. Exhausted and hopeful, they rush toward what seems to be a miracle, only to find the landscape unchanged when they arrive. Scholars might call these mirages tricks of heat and air, but those who have seen them speak with conviction. They believe these are the remnants of Iram, of the pillars, the lost city spoken of in the Quran, swallowed whole by the desert as punishment for its arrogance. Its ghost, they say, continues to appear to lure men into endless wandering. The Sahara is not only haunted by human spirits, some say. In the vast emptiness, there are tales of creatures that do not belong to the living world. Enormous shapes said to move across the dunes at night, shadows so massive they block out the stars. Their steps shake the sand, though no tracks remain by morning. Some describe them as colossal camels, others as serpents of impossible size, their bodies gliding silently beneath the surface of the dunes like sharks in an ocean of sand. Whether these are born from fevered minds or whether the desert hides monsters of its own, no one can say. Every grain of sand in the Sahara has been touched by death, and perhaps that is why so many strange things are heard and seen here. The desert does not forget. It carries memory in its wings. It carves it into stone. It buries it in silence. Those who listen closely may hear more than the cry of wind across the dunes. They may hear the stories of the countless souls who never made it out, voices trapped forever in the endless waste. Night in the Sahara is not like night anywhere else. In a forest, there is the comfort of leaves rustling, of distant animals stirring. In the mountains, the wind howls but carries life with it. But in the desert, when darkness spreads, it is a silence so pure that even your own heartbeat feels intrusive. And in that silence, something always seems to stir. A legend often repeated by traders speaks of the phantom caravan, an endless line of travelers doomed to march beneath the moonlight. Witnesses claim they can hear the heavy groans of camels, the calls of men urging them forward, and the rustle of fabrics dragged along the sand. The line stretches beyond sight, fading into the horizon. Yet when approached, the figures dissolve like smoke, leaving the witness standing alone. Some who have seen the phantom caravan insist that those who follow it are never seen again. Others say that if you hear it approaching behind you, you must never look back, for to do so is to join its eternal march. One chilling account comes from a merchant who claimed to have heard singing in the desert at night, voices rising in a mournful chorus. He followed the sound to find what he believed was a gathering of travelers around a distant fire. The glow drew him in, promising warmth and companionship. But as he neared, the fire seemed to shrink, and the figures melted into the sand. When he reached the spot, he found nothing but a hollow in the dune. That night, he swore he heard the same chorus encircling his camp, voices singing in a language he could not understand, till dawn finally silenced them. Another story, darker still, tells of a man who wandered away from his group in search of water. His companions later found him staggering back, his lips cracked, his eyes glassy. When asked where he had gone, he said he had followed a young woman in white who had called to him. She promised to lead him to a well. He described her as walking lightly across the sand, never leaving footprints. When they pressed him further, he broke down, admitting he had followed her until she vanished. And when she did, he heard laughter all around him. Days later, he died of fever, repeating the same words. She was waiting for him in the dune. The Sahara is filled with places no maps acknowledge, regions avoided even by the most experienced guides. One such place is said to be cursed by the cries of the dead. Travelers tell of approaching it by accident, drawn by a strange hum in the air. At first, it sounds like the wind vibrating across stone. Then it becomes the sound of moans, hundreds of them, overlapping, pulling at the mind. Those who enter say they feel drained, as though the heat and the voices are feeding on their strength. Some collapse and wake, to find themselves dragged back by their companions. Others are never found at all. Yet not every story ends with loss. There are accounts of people saved by the phantoms of the desert. A soldier lost during a patrol swore that a robed figure appeared before him, guiding him across the sands until he reached safety. When he turned to thank his savior, the figure had vanished. Another tale tells of a caravan that nearly perished when their guide lost his way. One night, they awoke to the sound of bells and saw a train of camels moving across the moonlit horizon. With no other choice, they followed, only to find themselves delivered to an oasis at dawn. The phantom caravan disappeared in the morning haze, but the travelers lived to tell the tale. The desert gives and the desert takes. Its phantoms are not always cruel, but they are never to be trusted. They exist on the edge of sight and sound, reminders that the Sahara is not empty. It is full of memories, full of death, full of voices that refuse to fade. Some say the whispers are nothing but the tricks of a vast, merciless landscape, that isolation and exhaustion conjure illusions in the mind. Yet the consistency of these tales, told across centuries by men of different nations and faiths, suggests something deeper. The Sahara does not simply test the body, it tests the spirit. It strips away certainty until even the strongest begin to doubt what is real. And in that doubt, the phantoms rise. Perhaps the most terrifying thought is not that the desert holds ghosts, but that the desert itself is the ghost. An eternal presence, stretching farther than we can imagine, absorbing the lives of all who dare to cross it, and whispering their stories back through the ages. Every howl of the wind, every flicker of light, every shadow that dances across the dunes might be the desert reminding us that it is alive and it remembers everything. The Sahara whispers, and those who have listened know its voice is not the wind. The deserts of the American Southwest are not merely barren stretches of sand and rock. They are living landscapes, steeped in stories older than the United States itself. In these vast spaces, silence has a voice, and the wind carries whispers from the past. To those who listen closely, the desert speaks of spirits who have lingered long after their flesh was gone. The Navajo call these places Dinebikea, the land of their ancestors. Among the most chilling stories told is that of the skinwalkers, dark figures said to wear the skins of animals, moving silently through the night. In Navajo tradition, skinwalkers are more than ghosts. They are witches, corrupted by power, able to take any form they desire. Travelers in the desert at night sometimes report seeing strange shapes along ridgelines, a coyote's silhouette that turns suddenly into a man, the rustle of footsteps without a sound to match, or the faint impression of someone walking just beyond sight. Those who encounter such things speak of an overwhelming sense of dread, as though something ancient and malevolent is watching. It is not only the tribes that speak of spirits in the desert. In the abandoned mining towns of the Southwest, the past clings to the crumbling wood and rusted metal. Places like Rhyolite in Nevada and Jerome in Arizona are littered with stories of hauntings. Visitors speak of saloons where the sound of laughter echoes through empty rooms. They tell of doors slamming in the night without wind, of footsteps pacing across floors long abandoned. One common tale is that of the ghostly miner, a man seen deep in the tunnels long after the mines were sealed. His lamp glows dimly in the dark, and he works endlessly, as if bound to finish a job left unfinished in life. Beyond the ghost towns, there are stories of spirits that roam the open desert. In Texas, there are countless accounts of the headless rider, a figure said to ride alone under the silver light of the moon. Witnesses describe a tall rider, dressed in weathered leather, with no head upon his shoulders. The rider is silent, moving without the sound of hooves, and vanishes without warning. In some tales, his appearance is a warning of death. Others say he is searching endlessly for something lost, forever bound to his path across the sand and stone. Route 66, the legendary highway that winds through the Southwest, has its own ghost stories. Drivers traveling alone at night sometimes speak of ghost hitchhikers who appear without warning. They tell of picking up a weary traveler who offers no name, only silence, sitting quietly in the back seat before disappearing at the next mile marker. Some speak of finding strange marks in their car after such encounters, as if some unseen presence had been there. For locals, these stories are old as the road itself whispers past from traveler to traveler under the night sky. There are also quieter, subtler hauntings, where the desert itself seems to keep a memory. Hikers report the sensation of being followed, a presence just behind them that vanishes when they turn. Campers speak of hearing distant voices carried on the wind, voices that sound human but vanish as soon as they focus on them. One storyteller from New Mexico speaks of camping near a canyon and waking to find footprints circling his tent in the sand. There were no other campers nearby, no animals large enough to leave such prints, yet the marks were there, a perfect circle around his shelter. Some of the most eerie tales come from the sacred places of the Southwest, where the boundaries between worlds are said to be thinnest. Canyon de Chelly, for example, is not only a living home to Navajo families, but also a place said to be watched over by spirits. Visitors are told of hearing drums in the distance when no drum is there, of seeing figures standing along cliff edges at night. The elders speak of these as the spirits of the ancestor, guardians of the land who appear to those who venture too close to the old paths. Another chilling tale comes from the deserts near Sedona, Arizona, where the red rocks are said to hum under the moonlight. Travelers who camp in the open often speak of waking to strange singing, soft and melodic coming from far away. When they rise to investigate, the sound fades, leaving only the wind. The voices, they say, are not the wind itself, but something older, a song carried from another time. A song of those who once walked these lands and never left. In the American Southwest, the line between legend and reality is thin. Spirits here are not confined to one form. They are warriors, wanderers, protectors, and tricksters. They speak in languages forgotten, and they appear to those who are willing or foolish enough to notice them. Some vanish when approached. Others linger, their presence felt long after the witness is gone. The desert itself becomes a place where the living and the dead walk side by side. The spirits of the Southwest are not just echoes of the past. They are reminders that these lands hold memory, that the rock and sand remember everything, and those who cross these deserts cannot leave without hearing their voices, whether in the howl of wind, the rustle of a shadow across the dunes, or the sudden silence that follows a whispered name. The desert at night carries with it a sense of ancient stillness, and in the Southwest, that stillness is often pierced by tales of spirits who refuse to rest. One such story comes from the ghost town of Chloride, Arizona. Long abandoned, it is a place where the past seems to cling stubbornly to the present. Travelers who pass through tell of hearing the creak of swinging doors and the sound of boots crunching gravel on streets that have been empty for decades. Some speak of seeing figures in old miner garb, standing outside the saloons, their faces pale and hollow. Visitors who have dared to enter the old chapel in Chloride have claimed to hear soft singing, hymns and voices that disappear as soon as the door is opened. Not far from Chloride, in the Mojave Desert, there are stories of strange lights known as the desert orbs. These are not the kind of lights that come from campfires or vehicles. They are small spheres glowing softly in colors that seem unnatural blue, green, gold drifting across the night sky without sound. Witnesses say they move with intention, sometimes stopping to hover over a spot as though examining it. Some who have seen the orbs say they've drawn toward them, compelled to follow, and when they did, found themselves miles away from where they began with no memory of how they arrived. Others believe the orbs are the souls of the lost, wandering the desert forever. The legends of the Southwest also speak of the Silent Canyon, a stretch of rock where sound itself is swallowed. Travelers who enter speak of an oppressive quiet that weighs upon them, a stillness so complete it drives some to madness. There are stories of those who have walked into the canyon and never returned, their last cries swallowed by the stones. Others have returned, speaking of hearing voices not carried on the wind, but echoing inside their own minds, urging them to turn back, to leave before they are lost forever. The Navajo tell another story of the Chindi, the spirits of the dead who cling to the world of the living. These are not spirits that come in peace. They carry with them bitterness, anger, and unfinished business. Those who see a Chindi are said to be cursed, their lives shadowed by misfortune. A traveler camping near Monument Valley once claimed he awoke to see a figure in his tent, cloaked in shadow. The figure said nothing but stared at him, its form shimmering like heat over stone. When the man rose to speak, the figure vanished, leaving behind a chill so deep it burned his skin. In the days that followed, every path he took seemed to lead him in circles, as if something was guiding him away from escape. The Southwest is also home to the spirits of the road, those bound to the long stretches of highway that cut through the desert. One of the most persistent tales is that of Highway 191 in Utah. Drivers alone at night speak of seeing a woman in white standing at the roadside, her face hidden beneath a veil. She appears suddenly in the beam of headlights, and when they slow to help her, she disappears without a trace. Some who have stopped there speak of a sudden sense of overwhelming sorrow, as if the air itself weeps. Others say she is searching for something, perhaps a lost traveler or a forgotten promise. Even the most modern travelers find themselves drawn to these stories. Campers on lonely desert roads have woken to find footprints circling their tents, though no one else was near. Hikers have spoken of hearing faint laughter in canyons when no other soul was present. There are reports of radios turning on by themselves in the middle of the night, filling the air with voices speaking in languages unknown. For those who have experienced it, the desert is not a quiet place. It is alive with memory, alive with presence, and alive with those who have never truly left. One of the most unsettling tales come from a group of travelers crossing a stretch of the Chihuahuan Desert. They stopped for the night under a sky so dark it seemed to swallow the stars. Around midnight, one of them awoke to a distant sound, a drumbeat. At first, it was slow, measured and rhythmic, growing louder with each passing moment. The others woke to the sound as well. When they stepped outside, they saw faint figures moving across the dunes, dancing in silence, their bodies blurred by distance. By morning, the sand was untouched, without a single mark to prove that anyone had been there. For the people of the Southwest, such stories are more than superstition. They are warnings, reminders that the land is old and full of secrets. The spirits who roam these deserts are not just echoes of the past. They are guardians, tricksters, mourners, and watchers. They remind travelers that the desert is not empty, that it holds the weight of centuries, and that every step across its sands carries you deeper into a history that is still alive. The spirits of the American Southwest are not bound to one form or one story. They appear in the shape of shadows, of light, of voices carried by the wind. They haunt canyons and highways, abandoned towns and sacred grounds. They linger in silence, in whispers, in the sound of footsteps that vanish the moment you turn to look. And those who hear them know that the desert does not simply forget. It remembers everything. The Southwest is a land shaped by both beauty and danger, where the landscape itself seems to hold memories of all who have passed through. For centuries, travelers have crossed these deserts, guided by stars and legends, carrying stories that blur the line between reality and the supernatural. In those stories, the spirits of the desert are never far away. One of the most haunting tales comes from the plains near the Grand Canyon. Hikers speak of an apparition they call the Watcher. Described as a tall figure draped in shadow, the Watcher appears only at twilight, standing motionless at the edge of the canyon. Those who have seen it say it does not move, does not speak, but seems to observe with an intensity that chills the soul. Some who stare back into the darkness say they feel drawn toward the edge, as if compelled to join whatever lies beyond. When they break eye contact, the figure vanishes. Locals believe the Watcher is the spirit of someone who fell into the canyon long ago, doomed to keep vigil forever. The deserts of New Mexico and Arizona are also rich with stories of ghost riders, figures that appear suddenly and vanish just as quickly. One story tells of a lone cowboy seen riding at night along an empty road near Silver City. His horse moves soundlessly, its hooves not disturbing the gravel. Travelers who have seen him describe a feeling of being watched long after he is gone. Some say he is a warning, an omen of trouble ahead. Others believe he is searching for something lost, wandering the desert with no rest until he finds it. These stories are not confined to legend. Many are backed by repeated experiences. In Utah's canyonlands, hikers speak of hearing voices echoing through narrow rock corridors, voices so faint they sound like whispers carried on breath. Some claim to hear their own names spoken softly in that voice. Others report seeing shapes moving in the periphery of their vision, silhouettes that vanish the moment they turn to look. These accounts are so common that the canyon is considered by some to be a place where the veil between worlds grows thin. Ghost towns are another focal point for the spirits of the Southwest. In places such as Calico, Nevada, and Rhyolite, Arizona, the air is thick with the weight of forgotten lives. Visitors speak of hearing children laughing in the ruins, of seeing figures dressed in turn-of-the-century clothing passing through the streets. At the old saloon in Rhyolite, the sound of piano music drifting from the empty building is often reported. No one is inside, yet the music continues, faint but unmistakable. For some, these ghost towns are not places of history, but places where history itself still lives. There are also darker tales, warnings passed down in whispers. In certain stretches of the desert, travelers speak of finding strange cairns, stacks of stones placed in unnatural formations. When disturbed, these cairns are said to bring misfortune, leading those who touch them deeper into peril. Locals warn that these are markers left by spirits, signs that the land has been claimed. To ignore them is to invite whatever watches from the shadows to follow you. Perhaps one of the most unsettling stories is told along the old Route 666, where travelers speak of a shadow that follows their car for miles. It is said to appear in the rearview mirror, a figure without form, shifting and dark, never visible in the headlights. Those who have looked back in fear claim the shadow vanishes instantly. Others have said that after such an encounter, strange accidents or disappearances follow, as if something has marked them for a fate they cannot escape. Some speak of the desert itself as a living spirit. In this telling, the Southwest is not merely haunted by human souls, but by the soul of the land. It watches, it remembers, it tests those who walk upon it. The wind is its voice, carrying whispers of the dead, and those who listen too closely may find themselves drawn into its story. To cross the Southwest is not just to travel across miles of stone and sand. It is to travel through memory, into a place where the living and the dead meet. In that meeting place, the spirits of the American Southwest walk freely. They wander ridgelines and canyons. They ride across lonely highways. They linger in abandoned towns and sacred grounds. They speak in silence, in footsteps, in music that fades with the wind. And they remind anyone who dares to listen that these deserts are not empty. They are alive with the voices of those who have never truly left. There are places in the American Southwest where the air itself feels heavy, as though every grain of sand carries a memory. Travelers speak of nights when the desert hums, a low vibration underfoot that cannot be explained by wind or movement. In those moments, even the most skeptical feel a presence, a living weight in the darkness. In northern Arizona, near the petrified forest, there are stories of travelers encountering figures at the edge of the road who vanish before their eyes. These figures are often described as indistinct shapes, dressed in clothing of another era, their faces hidden or blurred. Those who have seen them describe a profound unease, as though the desert itself is warning them to turn back. Some who ignore the warning find themselves lost, not in distance, but in time. They speak of waking to find hours or days gone, as though they have walked through another world entirely. Among the Navajo, the most feared spirits are not those who wander freely, but those bound by unfinished deeds. The Chindi are said to cling to the living world with malice. To encounter one is to invite sickness, misfortune, or madness. Guides warn travelers never to speak of these spirits, believing that to name them is to call them closer. Campers in remote canyons tell of waking to find objects moved or disturbed, even when no one else is nearby. They describe hearing breathing in the darkness, slow and deliberate, as if something unseen circles their camp. Some wake to discover footprints that lead toward them, stopping abruptly at the edge of the tent. The spirit of the Southwest is not limited to ancient tradition. Modern legends have grown up alongside highways and neon signs. Travelers driving lonely stretches of road at night speak of seeing phantom vehicles' headlights in the distance that vanish when approached. Others tell of radio static giving way to voices speaking in languages unknown, often repeating a name over and over. These voices seem to come not from the radio itself, but from the air around them, carried in the wind that sweeps across the desert. In the old mining town of Goldfield, Nevada, the stories take a darker turn. Visitors speak of hearing the laughter of children inside buildings long abandoned, of seeing shadows pass behind broken windows. Some have reported encountering miners still at work, deep underground, their lamps glowing faintly in tunnels that have been closed for a century. When the curious descend, they find only silence and dust. Yet outside, the sound of hammering can still be heard, echoing softly into the night. In the deserts of New Mexico, there are tales of ghostly processions seen in the moonlight. Witnesses claim to have seen lines of figures moving through the sand, their forms indistinct, but clearly human, moving in silence toward some unseen destination. They vanish as suddenly as they appear, leaving behind only the impression of their passing footprints in the sand that fade before the dawn. Locals speak of these processions as the spirits of those lost to the desert, bound to walk forever in the path they once followed in life. Perhaps the most unsettling stories are not of sight, but of touch. Campers and hikers in remote parts of the Southwest report waking to the sensation of hands brushing against them in the dark. Some describe it as cold and clammy, others as light as a whisper. None have seen who or what touched them, but the feeling remains long after. In Navajo tradition, such touches are warnings, a sign that a spirit is near. To ignore it is to invite danger. The American Southwest is vast and ancient, and in its deserts, the living are never truly alone. The spirits that roam these lands are not bound to graveyards or ruins. They walk ridgelines, ride highways, linger at canyon edges, and stand silent in the moonlight. They speak in the sigh of wind through rock formations, in footsteps that have no source, in whispers carried across the sands. For those who travel these deserts, the question is never whether the spirits are real. The question is whether they will speak to you and whether you will listen. To cross the deserts of the Southwest is to step into a place where the past still walks beside the present, where every shadow could be a story waiting to be told, and where the silence is never truly empty. The spirits of the American Southwest are not gone. They are simply waiting. Waiting in the stillness of the night, in the hush of the canyons, in the flicker of headlights along empty roads. Waiting to remind those who pass that the desert does not forget. And for those who hear them, the desert speaks forever. The deserts of the Middle East stretch endlessly, places of unimaginable beauty and unforgiving danger. They have been home to civilizations that rose and fell under the scorching sun, kingdoms swallowed by sand, and travelers who vanished without trace. But beneath the dunes lies another layer of history, the stories of spirits who roam these ancient lands, echoes of empires, caravans, and warriors long gone. From the vast emptiness of the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter, to the golden stretches of the Sinai, the deserts of the Middle East are filled with whispers. The desert here is more than a landscape. It is memory incarnate, a living witness to centuries of triumph and tragedy. Those who have crossed it speak of the feeling of being watched, of shadows that move without light, and of voices carried by the wind that speak in languages no living soul understands. One of the most persistent legends comes from Arabia, the story of the jinn. In ancient folklore, the jinn are beings made of smokeless fire, existing between the seen and unseen worlds. They are neither wholly good nor wholly evil, and their presence in the desert is said to predate humanity itself. Travelers speak of encountering them as fleeting figures in the distance, glimpses of movement just beyond sight. Some have heard their laughter echoing across dunes at night. Others claim to hear the whisper of their names carried by the wind. To meet a jinn in the desert is to stand in the presence of something older than time. In Bedouin tradition, certain parts of the desert are marked as cursed places where the veil between worlds is thin. The Bedouin speak of ruins that appear suddenly to travelers, only to vanish when approached. There are stories of ghost caravans wandering in these cursed sands, their bells and drums heard long before any figure appears. The caravan is often said to be bound to repeat its final journey, forever wandering between this world and the next. Those who have encountered it speak of voices calling from the dark, urging them to follow, only to disappear once they draw closer. One traveler in Oman told of seeing such a caravan while crossing the Wahiba Sands. He described the faint glow of lanterns in the distance, the rhythmic sound of camels' bells, and the low murmur of voices. Drawn by curiosity, he approached, but the air grew colder and the shapes melted into the dunes as though swallowed by the night. He later learned from local guides that many travelers have reported similar visions in that part of the desert, and they are always linked to those who vanish without a trace. The deserts of Iraq and Syria, home to ancient trade routes and lost cities, are steeped in legends of wandering spirits. Palmyra, the ruined jewel of the desert, is said to be haunted by the ghosts of its past. Travelers and archaeologists have reported hearing music and laughter in the ruins after sunset, and seen faint outlines of people in ancient robes walking the old stone streets. Some speak of a presence that follows them through the ruins, unseen but felt, close in the still air of the desert night. There is a story among traders of a ghostly guide who appears to travelers lost in the sands. He is said to appear suddenly, a tall figure robed in white, offering to lead the weary across the dunes. Those who follow him describe an easy path and the soothing sound of his voice, but those who stop to speak to him vanish soon after. Locals warn that the guide is not a helper, but a spirit who lures the lost to join him in his endless wandering. In the Sinai, near the ancient city of Petra, there are tales of the desert bride. It is said she appears at twilight, a woman in white with eyes that glimmer like polished stone. She walks without sound, moving along ancient paths long forgotten. Those who encounter her speak of a sudden cold that chills to the bone, and of a voice that calls their name softly in the wind. Some who have followed her have never returned, while others awake at dawn with no memory of how they reached safety. The haunted sands of the Middle East are not only the product of superstition, but of history. The desert here has seen empires rise and fall, armies march to war, and caravans vanish into the dust. Every grain of sand is said to hold a story, and many claim the desert remembers. In the dead of night, when the heat fades and silence falls, those memories awaken. The wind carries them as whispers. The dunes shift to reveal them, and the spirits step out of the past to walk once more across the living sands. Even modern travelers speak of strange things in these deserts. Drivers on lonely roads at night have seen glowing figures on the horizon. Campers wake to sounds of footsteps circling their tents. Pilgrims speak of voices calling them across the dunes. For all who enter these lands, there is a common warning: to travel the deserts of the Middle East is to enter a place where the past is never truly gone, and where the line between the living and the dead is blurred forever. The haunting of the Middle Eastern deserts is often not loud or obvious. It is subtle, a presence felt rather than seen. Travelers speak of the strange stillness that descends at night, when the desert becomes almost alive. The air grows heavier, and even the sound of the wind changes, becoming softer, deeper, almost like a sigh. It is in that silence that the spirits make themselves known. One of the most persistent legends comes from the Sinai Peninsula, where travelers tell of encountering the jinn of the pass. Said to dwell in narrow desert valleys and rocky gorges, these spirits are both feared and respected. They are said to appear as shifting shadows, and their presence is accompanied by a sudden drop in temperature. Travelers speak of seeing a figure at the edge of their campfire, vanishing when approached, leaving only the faint smell of frankincense in the air. Bedouin guides warn that to speak to such a being is dangerous, for a jinn's words are a test, and to fail is to vanish forever in the sands. In the deserts of Arabia, there are also stories of the lost caravans, ghostly processions of traders who disappeared centuries ago. Witnesses speak of seeing their lights flicker in the distance at night, like lanterns moving slowly across the dunes. When approached, the lights vanish, leaving behind nothing but footprints that fade as if swallowed by the sand. These processions are often accompanied by a strange music, low and haunting, as if an invisible ensemble plays upon instruments no living hand has touched. Those who have heard it say the sound lingers long after the vision is gone, a memory etched into the mind. The Empty Quarter, one of the most inhospitable deserts on Earth, is said to be especially haunted. Bedouin legends speak of areas within the dunes where travelers disappear without trace. The locals call these places al-Kaf, meaning the cave or the hidden place. Here voices echo in the night, calling out names in languages long forgotten. Wanderers have reported sudden mirages, visions of oases, camps, and marketplaces that vanish when approached. Some say these illusions are the work of spirits trying to lure the living into the depths of the desert, to join them in a journey without end. In Iraq, among the ruins of Babylon and along the desert plains, there are tales of the Whispering Sands. Travelers speak of nights when the wind carries voices so clearly they can understand them. Voices telling stories of ancient battles, lost loves, and cities swallowed by time. These whispers are not always friendly. Some warn of approaching storms, others speak of warnings of doom. To hear them is considered both a gift and a curse. The deserts of the Middle East are not without their ghosts of war and conquest. The caravan routes of old Arabia were once battlefields, and the ghosts of those fallen in conflict are said to wander still. In the deserts near Petra, there are accounts of travelers seeing ghostly warriors riding under the moonlight, their armor glinting faintly. The sound of horses' hooves can sometimes be heard long before the figures appear. These warriors are said to be bound to the night, replaying battles fought centuries ago. Those who encounter them rarely speak again of what they have seen. Even modern highways that cross these deserts carry stories of hauntings. Drivers alone at night often speak of seeing figures at the roadside who vanish when approached. In Saudi Arabia, there are tales of ghostly hitchhikers who appear at remote gas stations, disappearing when given a ride. Some who have picked them up speak of being led deep into the desert, only to wake later with no memory of how they returned. Locals warn that these are not people, but spirits bound to the sands. For those who enter the deserts of the Middle East, there is always a sense that the land remembers. The ruins of cities swallowed by sand, the remains of caravans lost in storms, and the echoes of ancient voices are all woven into the dunes. To travel these deserts is to walk in the footsteps of countless souls, to cross a threshold where the living and the dead meet. These haunted sands carry warnings. They speak in the sigh of the wind, in shapes that vanish when approached, in voices that call softly at night. For those who listen, the deserts of the Middle East are not empty. They are alive with the past, and the past is never truly gone. The desert nights of the Middle East are unlike anywhere else in the world. There is a stillness so complete it feels alive. Travelers speak of a sensation as though the land itself is listening, waiting. In that stillness, the haunted sands speak. They speak not in words, but in presence, in fleeting visions, in footsteps heard without origin, in voices carried by the wind. One of the most chilling traditions is the Bedouin belief in the Marid, a type of powerful jinn said to dwell deep within the desert. The Marid is both revered and feared, capable of granting wishes or bringing ruin. Travelers tell of meeting a Marid at night, a figure shimmering with heat and shadow, standing motionless on the crest of a dune. Those who have seen it speak of an overwhelming feeling of both awe and dread, as if staring into something infinite. They say the Marid does not speak in human tongues, but but calls in a voice that resonates in the soul, a call that lingers long after the encounter ends. There are places in the Middle East where the haunted sands seem to take form. The Rub al-Khali is said to contain the lost city of Ubar, swallowed by the desert long ago. Some claim that at night you can still hear its market cries and the clatter of merchants' footsteps. Bedouin guides speak of encountering sudden illusions of ruins shimmering in the heat haze. To step into them is said to be dangerous, for the sands remember those who enter and may never let them leave. In Oman's Wahiba Sands, there are whispers of the night walkers, spirits who roam after dusk. Locals speak of seeing figures walking the dunes without footprints, their presence announced by faint laughter or the sound of bells. Travelers tell of waking in the middle of the night to find shadows circling their camps, dissolving into the air before they can be seen clearly. These spirits are said to be the echoes of lost caravans, bound to wander for eternity. Even in places steeped in history and legend, such as Petra, the haunted sands leave their mark. Visitors to the ancient city at night have reported hearing music from deep within the stone corridors. The sound is faint but persistent, like an unseen orchestra playing a melody older than time. Those who follow the sound say they are led deeper into the ruins, only to find themselves outside once again, with no memory of how they arrived there. For some, Petra is not simply a place of stone, but a living echo of its own past, a crossroads where the dead walk among the living. The deserts of Iraq, Syria, and Saudi Arabia hold their own spectral warnings. In some stretches of sand, travelers speak of a voice calling from far away, naming them softly. Those who answer the call sometimes vanish without trace. Others report waking with a sudden start, convinced they heard footsteps around their tents, but finding nothing but sand and silence. Locals speak of these areas as cursed ground, places where the boundary between this world and the next is perilously thin. In modern times, even roads that cut through these ancient deserts have become stages for ghost stories. Drivers traveling alone at night on the highways of Saudi Arabia and Jordan often speak of strange figures standing at the roadside. They appear without warning, often just in the beam of headlights, and vanish when approached. Some are said to hold lanterns, their light glowing faintly in the desert darkness, beckoning travelers into the dunes. Those who stop are rarely seen again. The deserts of the Middle East are not merely places of sand and stone. They are living memories, vessels of history and legend. Every grain of sand is said to hold a story. Every wind carries whispers of those who once walked these lands. To enter these deserts is to step into a world where the past never fades, where every shadow may conceal a spirit, and where the haunted sands remember everything. For those who travel there, the warning is always the same. Respect the desert, for it holds more than just emptiness. It holds voices. It holds memories. It holds the restless souls of the past. And in the stillness of night, it speaks. The haunted sands of the Middle East do not forgive. They do not forget. They wait. There is something uniquely haunting about a ghost town swallowed by the desert. The sand does not merely cover ruins, it claims them. Over time, stone and wood disappear beneath shifting dunes, leaving only whispers of what once was. In these places, silence is absolute. The wind is the only voice, and the echoes of the past linger like a half-forgotten dream. Across deserts from every corner of the world, there are towns that vanished under sand and time, leaving behind not only ruins, but restless memories. These are places where the living and the dead seem to meet, where every collapsed wall and weathered doorway feels as if it still remembers the footsteps of those who walked before, where the desert is not empty, but full of stories that refuse to die. One of the most famous of these lost towns lies in the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter of Arabia. Beneath its endless dunes is said to rest the ancient city of Ubar, sometimes called the Atlantis of the sands. Ubar was a thriving caravan stop on the frankincense trade route, until it vanished into the desert centuries ago. Bedouin legends speak of it still, describing a city swallowed whole by divine punishment. They say that at certain times of night, when the moon hangs high, you can hear the faint murmur of voices and the clatter of distant footsteps in the dunes where Ubar once stood. Those who have ventured there at such times speak of seeing shadows of buildings rising from the sand, glowing faintly before dissolving again. The Middle East is not alone in its buried cities. Across the world, deserts have claimed settlements and left behind ghost towns that are haunted by memory. In Egypt, the lost city of Heracleion lies submerged beneath the waters of Abu Qir Bay, its ruins occasionally glimpsed when the tide recedes. Divers speak of a strange stillness in the water above it, of shadows that pass just beyond sight. In those ruins, statues seem to stare with an eerie awareness, and the silence is broken only by the sound of something like distant chanting. Even where sand does not fully consume them, ghost towns stand as monuments to vanished lives. In the deserts of the American Southwest, towns like Rhyolite, Calico, and Terlingua are preserved as skeletons of history. They are places where the past lingers with an almost physical presence. Visitors speak of hearing music drifting from the saloon in Rhyolite, of laughter echoing through empty streets at night. Campers near Terlingua speak of waking to the sound of footsteps on gravel and seeing figures vanish into the darkness before they can be named. In Jordan, the ancient city of Petra is itself a ghost town of a different kind. Carved into rose-colored cliffs, it was once a thriving trade hub, and now stands as a place where history and legend intertwine. By day, it is filled with tourists and guides, but by night, the air changes. Guides tell of nights when the city is silent, except for the sound of footsteps in the stone corridors. Some visitors have spoken of seeing cloaked figures moving between the ruins and hearing soft voices calling names that no living person should know. There are ghost towns buried deeper still towns that no map records, places whose names have been forgotten. In the deserts of Libya, travelers speak of the lost oases of the Sahara. These were once hubs of life and trade, now swallowed by sandstorms. Bedouin legends tell of the ghosts of these oases, still wandering in search of water and shelter. They speak of hearing the faint sound of flowing water at night, of seeing mirages of palm trees and wells that vanish when approached. The haunting of ghost towns buried in sand is not only a matter of sight. It is the way the air feels when you stand among their ruins, the way the silence weighs upon you. Visitors speak of sudden chills, of the sense of being watched. Some have claimed to hear voices carried on the wind, speaking in languages that have long since died. Others have seen shapes moving among the ruins at dusk, figures that vanish when looked at directly. These towns are not simply empty places. They are doorways into the past. They are echoes carved into stone and preserved in dust. To walk through them is to walk between worlds where the living touch the forgotten, where memory itself becomes a presence. The ghost towns speak in the sigh of wind through ruins, in the creak of weathered wood, in the faint sound of footsteps that no one else hears. They are the desert's own stories, written not in words, but in the bones of the earth. Some ghost towns buried in sand are known to few outside their regions, hidden by the desert's shifting face, known only in whispered tales. These places become not just ruins, but living legends, portals to another time. Those who wander into them speak of an uncanny stillness, as though the town itself is holding its breath, watching to see who dares to enter. In Oman, the ruins of Ubar are spoken of as more than an archaeological wonder. Locals say that at certain nights, when the moon is full, the ruins breathe life again. Visitors have described hearing the soft murmur of market voices, the sound of camel hooves crunching over sand, and the faint clinking of coins. Some have reported seeing figures in flowing robes and turbans, moving between crumbled walls, fading like mist as they approach. Bedouin guides warn that those who linger too long risk becoming part of the town's memory, claimed by the sands themselves. In Egypt, near the edges of the Great Sand Sea, there are scattered ruins of settlements whose names have been lost to history. These ghost towns speak through absence. Campers who have stayed near them tell of waking in the dead of night to the sound of distant music, a soft melody that drifts over the dunes and vanishes before it can be followed. Others have felt the sensation of unseen footsteps circling their tents, always stopping when they look out into the black desert. The sand here is said to remember those who walked it, and to whisper of them to those who will listen. Across the deserts of Iran, there are ruined towns abandoned for centuries. Shari-Babak is one such place, a settlement swallowed by sand and silence. Locals speak of hearing the voices of children playing in the ruins after sunset, and of seeing lantern lights glowing faintly in the dunes where no campfire burns. Archaeologists who work in these deserts report strange phenomena: cameras that fail inexplicably, compasses spinning without reason, and the sudden disappearance of equipment. For them, these are not malfunctions, but signs that the desert keeps its secrets fiercely. In Libya, the lost city of Zerzura has inspired tales for centuries. Caravan leaders whisper of entering a shimmering oasis that appears without warning, a city of white marble, date palms, and cool water. Those who see it say the city hums with life, with voices and laughter. Yet when they approach, the vision dissolves, leaving nothing but endless dunes. Bedouin lore treats Zerzura as a place of both beauty and danger, a city of ghosts, where those who enter are bound to wander forever, lost in the desert's embrace. Even the deserts of the American Southwest have their buried towns with stories that haunt travelers. In New Mexico and Arizona, places like Rhyolite and Cerro Gordo stand as monuments to vanished lives. Visitors speak of hearing footsteps echoing through the empty streets after dusk, of the faint sound of a piano playing in an abandoned saloon, and of whispers drifting through the windless night. Some who visit Rhyolite claim to have seen ghostly figures moving along its cracked sidewalks, figures dressed in clothing from the early 1900s, their faces blurred as if they are not fully of this world. These apparitions stand silently in doorways or wander along streets littered with broken glass and rusted iron. Others have spoken of lights flickering inside the ruins as if lanterns from another era were still being carried along those empty streets. Cerro Gordo, a mining town buried in the shadows of the desert mountains, carries a similar reputation. Once thriving with silver and lead mines, it is now a skeleton of stone and rust. Travelers recount hearing the echo of distant hammers striking rock, the laughter of unseen miners, and the creak of doors swinging open in the silence. At night, some say the town comes alive again in whispers and fleeting shapes. Those who linger too long often feel a presence watching them, a sensation that grows stronger after midnight. Across the American Southwest, ghost towns share another haunting quality the way they are claimed by the desert itself. Sand and dust creep over doorways, bury streets, and erase the sharp edges of stone and metal. These ruins are not static relics. They are living memories, slowly being consumed by the earth. Campers in these deserts often speak of waking to the sound of footsteps circling their tents, even when no wind stirs. Some have seen shapes crossing the dunes at night, disappearing into the darkness as soon as they are noticed. In New Mexico, the ghost town of Lake Valley is said to be haunted by the souls of miners who lived and died there. Visitors report hearing faint voices calling in the night, and the sound of boots striking gravel where no living person walks. In Arizona, Ruby Ghost Town holds stories of sudden chills and shadows that move against the wind. Locals whisper of sightings of figures at the edge of the town at twilight, watching silently before fading into the desert. These ghost towns, half buried in sand and silence, are more than abandoned places. They are reminders of the fragility of human life in the face of time and nature. Every stone wall, every rusted signpost, every forgotten path carries a memory. In the stillness of the night, these places speak in whispers, telling stories of lives lived, dreams abandoned, and the inexorable march of the desert that swallows everything. To walk through a ghost town buried in sand is to walk through a living memory. The desert does not simply erase these places. It transforms them into something both haunting and eternal. The silence here is not absence. It is presence. The sand itself remembers. And so these ghost towns stand, not as empty shells, but as echoes. The desert carries them forward, keeping their stories alive long after their walls have crumbled and their names have been forgotten. In Saudi Arabia, among the dunes of the Nafud Desert, there are ruins whose names are long forgotten. Local tribes speak of them as places cursed, where the past still walks. Travelers report hearing voices at twilight, the sound of prayer, the clash of metal, and the laughter of children. These voices seem to rise from the sand itself, carried on the wind and fading with the night. Those who have lingered too long in such ruins speak of dreams filled with strange visions, marketplaces bustling with people dressed in long robes, the scent of spices in the air, and figures beckoning from between crumbling walls. The haunting of these ghost towns is not confined to sound. It is a presence that presses close in the stillness of night. Visitors to buried towns in the deserts of Iran and Egypt have described sudden chills, a sense of eyes watching them, and even the touch of unseen hands. Campers often speak of waking to the sound of footsteps circling their tents, and of shadows that seem to move against the wind. Locals warn that to spend the night in such places is to risk becoming part of their memory, forever woven into their story. In Libya, the legend of Zerzura continues to capture the imagination of desert wanderers. Those who claim to have glimpsed it speak of a city unlike any other, shimmering in the heat haze, filled with crystal fountains and marble columns. The air there is said to be cool and fragrant, filled with the sound of voices speaking in an unknown tongue. Yet as soon as one approaches, the city disappears into the dunes, leaving only silence and the endless shifting sand. Bedouin elders speak of Zerzura as a place where the living are invited to join the dead, a city that exists only at the edge of memory. The haunting becomes even more profound when the ghost towns themselves are revealed by nature. Sandstorms sometimes strip away layers of dunes, revealing stone streets and collapsed walls that have not been seen for centuries. Archaeologists working in the deserts of the Middle East speak of moments when a dig site suddenly feels alive, when a stillness falls over the camp, and when soft whispers are carried on the wind. In such moments, the line between past and present dissolves. The ruins do not seem abandoned at all, but inhabited by the echo of lives long gone. There is something deeply unsettling about ghost towns buried in sand. They are not ruins frozen in time, but places where time itself has been swallowed. To stand in one is to stand in a liminal space, a place between life and death, between memory and oblivion. The sand acts as both grave and guardian, preserving the stories of the town while keeping them hidden. For those who walk among these towns, the desert does not speak in clear language. It whispers. It speaks in the sigh of wind through crumbled walls, in the sound of footsteps that have no origin, in voices that call softly in the dark. The ghost towns buried in sand do not simply vanish. They live on in a story, in memory, and in the restless presence of the desert itself. They stand as silent witnesses to the passage of time, to the fragility of human endeavor, and to the certainty that nothing lasts forever. And in the stillness of the night, when the wind carries the scent of dust and history, they speak again. The ghost towns buried in sand are not dead. They are waiting for someone to listen to their story. There is a strange kind of voice in the world's deserts. It is not heard so much as felt, a silence that hums, a stillness so complete it becomes alive. The wastelands of the earth hold their own kind of haunting, one that is quieter than footsteps or whispers, but deeper and more profound. It is the silence of eternity, a places untouched by time except in their absence, where the air itself seems to remember. Travelers who venture into the great deserts speak often of this silence. It is not emptiness, it is a presence. In the Sahara, the silence is described as a living thing, heavy and vast, pressing down with the weight of centuries. In the deserts of the American Southwest, it is the stillness after sunset, when the last light fades and the land becomes a canvas for shadows. In the Middle East, it is the hush of the dunes at night, a quiet so absolute, it feels as if the desert is holding its breath. The eternal silence of the wastelands carries stories older than any spoken word. Beneath shifting sands lie cities, caravans, and kingdoms, lost to history. These are places where time itself has been buried. The silence that covers them is not simply the absence of sound, but the absence of forgetting. In these wastelands, memory becomes part of the air. Some who have wandered far into these deserts speak of hearing the silence shift. It begins as a normal hush, but after hours of travel, it deepens into something unnatural. A traveler might pause, noticing a faint change, a stillness that feels almost deliberate. The wind stops altogether. Even the sand seems to hold still. Then in that silence, there comes something else, a sound too faint to define, as if the wasteland itself is speaking. In the empty quarter of Arabia, this silence is part of the legend. Bedouin elders call it al-Samt al-Abadi, the eternal silence. They speak of travelers who enter certain stretches of the desert and never return, claiming only that the silence took them. These places are marked in their minds not by landmarks, but by an absence of sound, of movement, of the living. The silence there is said to be deeper than night, pressing in upon the mind until it feels as though one is suspended outside of time. The silence of the desert is not without warning. Those who have felt it speak of signs before it arrives, a sudden stillness in the air, the hush of the wind, the soft settling of sand underfoot. Animals grow quiet. Even the smallest noises vanish. It is as if the world is... When the silence falls, it is no movement, no sound, only the vast emptiness stretching into forever. In the deserts of the American Southwest, this silence takes on another form. Ghost towns buried in sand, abandoned mines, and forgotten trails all seem to hum with it. Travelers in these places describe standing in perfect stillness at dusk, feeling a weight settle over them. Some speak of a sudden sense that they are not alone, that something unseen is sharing the silence with them. Others have reported hearing their own name called softly in the wind, though there is no one nearby to speak it. Even the deserts of the Middle East, with their history of cities and empires lost to the sands, hold this same silence. In places like the Syrian desert, where ruins stand scattered and broken under the sun, the air itself feels laden with memory. The silence there is not empty. It is the silence of countless lives, of voices lost to time, of history swallowed whole. To stand in such a place is to stand in the presence of something eternal. The silence of the wastelands is not simply the absence of noise. It is a presence in itself. It is the echo of forgotten voices, the breath of vanished cities, and the watchfulness of deserts that have seen countless generations rise and fall. It is the voice of the past, carried without words in the hush of the world. For those who listen closely, this silence speaks. And when it speaks, it tells of deserts that are not empty, but full of memory, of good. This silence is not merely the absence of sound, but a presence that shapes perception. Travelers speak of time stretching and bending in these wastelands. Hours can feel like minutes, and footsteps can seem to vanish before they touch the sand. The silence changes the way one senses the world. It sharpens every detail and yet blurs certainty. It is a silence that makes the mind listen harder, and in that listening, begins to hear what should not be there. In the Sahara, there are stretches of desert where the silence becomes a kind of living shadow. Caravans that pass through speak of the stillness growing heavier as they travel deeper, until sound itself becomes a memory. Some say that in this silence, you can hear whispers of the past voices carried across centuries. The Bedouin call these places al-Samt al-Abadi, the eternal silence, and they warn that those who linger too long risk losing themselves to it. There are stories of travelers who vanished in these zones, leaving behind only footprints that disappear before dawn. The silence of the wastelands is also a kind of mirror. In it, travelers often find themselves confronting things they did not expect: fragments of memory, flashes of vision, feelings not their own. Some have claimed to see shadows moving under the sand, figures in the far distance that vanish when approached. Others speak of sudden visions of ruined cities, of marketplaces and caravans, long buried, appearing in the hush of night. The desert, it seems, can recall its own past, and in the silence, it offers a glimpse of it to those who listen. In the deserts of the American Southwest, the silence is a living memory of the ghost towns buried there. At night, when the wind drops and the world grows still, these places seem to speak. Campers in Rayolite have reported hearing the sound of boots on gravel, of doors creaking, of voices speaking softly just beyond hearing. At the edge of abandoned streets, some have seen figures walking slowly, dressed in the clothes of another age. They do not speak and vanish when approached, but their presence lingers. It is a silence full of their memory, a silence that is not absence, but a kind of haunting. In the Middle East, the silence carries the weight of history. In places like the Syrian desert, where ruins stand scattered under the endless sky, the hush after sunset becomes almost sacred. There are stretches of dunes where no wind blows, where the air hangs still and heavy. Travelers speak of standing in such silence and feeling the desert reach into them, pressing memories into their minds. Some have described hearing faint music, the sound of laughter or the echo of voices long lost. Others have felt a presence beside them, unseen but unmistakable. The silence of the wastelands is not a void. It is a living thing, filled with the ghosts of history. It carries the stories of cities buried in sand, of caravans lost to time, of voices swallowed by the wind. It is the silence that remembers. Those who have walked into this silence speak of a change in themselves. They return different, as if the desert has left part of itself with them. Some speak of dreams filled with the sound of distant voices. Others speak of waking to find themselves holding memories they cannot place. In the wastelands, silence is not merely absence. It is a presence that touches the soul, a living echo of all that has been buried. And so the wastelands keep their silence. They do not speak in words. They speak in stillness. And for those who listen closely, the stillness is not empty. It is full of stories, full of memory, full of ghosts. The deeper one ventures into the wastelands, the heavier the silence becomes. It is not a silence that can be measured. It has no clock or scale. It is measured in the way the air feels on the skin, in the way the heart begins to beat differently, in the way footsteps themselves seem to shrink into nothing. Travelers speak of reaching points where the silence is so complete it feels alive, as if the desert itself is breathing quietly around them. In the great deserts of the Middle East, there are places where the silence is said to be ancient, older even than the ruins buried beneath the sand. Among the shifting dunes, Bedouin stories speak of places where the world was once different, where cities rose and fell under the watch of the desert. They call these places Maqamat al-Samt, stations of silence. These are said to be crossroads between the living and the dead, where the desert keeps its memories most fiercely. Those who have crossed them speak of a change in perception, a stillness so absolute that even thought begins to slow, as if the mind itself is listening to something beyond words. The silence of the wastelands carries with it a strange kind of invitation. To some, it is an allure drawing them deeper into the desert, urging them to leave behind the world of noise and enter a place where time and sound have no meaning. To others, it is a warning, a reminder that there are places where humans are not meant to linger. Travelers who have stayed too long in the silence speak of dreams they cannot forget, visions of ghost towns buried under dunes, of shadows walking along ancient streets, of voices calling them into the depths of the desert. In the American Southwest, ghost towns hidden among sand and rock seem to hold the same quality of silence. At twilight, the hush settles differently in these places. Campers have spoken of hearing the soft murmur of voices, the sound of unseen footsteps, and the creak of doors swinging in ruins long abandoned. In some towns, the silence feels almost conscious, as if the place itself is aware of the living who have wandered into it. These towns are not simply empty, they are memories that have not yet faded, kept alive by the desert and by the silence that surrounds them. The desert silence is not always oppressive. For some, it is a strange comfort, a space where the mind can listen to itself without distraction. But in other places, it carries the weight of something far older and far darker. It is in these places that travelers speak of hearing voices that do not belong to the wind voices of people who no longer walk the earth. Some say the desert itself keeps these voices, preserving them like a memory that refuses to die. Others speak of a quiet that is almost alive, a stillness that seems to watch and wait. There are even those who claim that the silence has a form, that it moves, flows, and breathes like water. Bedouin elders speak of it as if it were a living guardian of the desert, protecting the memory of the places buried within it. They tell of travelers who have entered the heart of the silence and never returned, becoming part of the desert's endless story. To them, the silence is not absence. It is presence. It is the desert speaking in its own language. In these eternal wastelands, silence is not nothing. It is memory. It is the voice of the desert itself. It is the last echo of cities that have fallen, of caravans that vanished, of lives swallowed by sand. The silence does not end. It does not fade. It waits, stretching across centuries, keeping the stories of the wastelands alive for those who will listen. As the silence stretches deeper into the heart of the wastelands, it becomes something that cannot be escaped. Travelers speak of reaching a point where the stillness is not simply around them, but inside them, as if the desert has reached into their mind. There is no sound but the quiet of thought itself, and in that quiet, the desert speaks in a language older than words. In the great deserts of Arabia, there are stretches of dunes where Bedouin lore says the silence is the voice of the dead. These are places where entire caravans vanished without trace, where towns were swallowed in a single night of wind and sand. The elders call them Samt al-Majub, the hidden silence. They speak of a stillness that holds the history of all who have crossed it, a silence that remembers every step taken, every word spoken, every life that once passed through the sands. To enter such a place is to step into a living memory, and some say that those who do never truly return. The silence is also a keeper of truth. In the deserts of the Middle East and North Africa, it is said that if one stands still long enough, the silence will reveal the history of the place. Travelers speak of visions that come without warning, glimpses of cities buried under dunes, marketplaces filled with life, caravans winding across endless sands. These visions are not always clear, but they leave an impression so deep it becomes part of memory. Some say the desert chooses who is worthy to hear these stories. Others claim that it is the desert's way of protecting them. In the American Southwest, the silence holds its own ghosts. Ghost towns buried by sand and time keep their stories in the hush that falls at twilight. At certain hours when the wind dies, travelers say they can hear footsteps echoing through empty streets, faint voices whispering just out of reach, and the sound of music from a time long past. These voices are not part of the living world. They are memories made sound, the echo of lives buried with the town. To stand in such a place is to stand at the edge of memory itself. The silence of the wastelands is not a stillness that belongs to the living. It belongs to the past. It belongs to what has been lost. And in that belonging, it becomes eternal. The silence does not fade. It grows. It becomes a presence that watches over the desert, a guardian of its stories. It is the quiet of centuries, the hush of empires buried under sand, and the breath of history itself. Some who have walked far into these places speak of leaving with a change they cannot explain. They speak of carrying the silence with them, even when they return to the noise of the world. They speak of dreams filled with voices that belong to no living person, of visions of ruins that exist only in memory, and of a feeling that the desert still watches them. To walk into the silence of the wastelands is not simply to walk into emptiness. It is to walk into eternity. And in that eternity, the desert waits. It waits in silence. Not a silence of nothingness, but a silence filled with memory, with story, with ghosts. It is the silence that remains long after footsteps fade, the silence that holds the secrets of the world. The wastelands keep their silence. They keep it for centuries. They keep it for those who will listen. And in that silence lies their eternal story. The desert never truly sleeps. Its silence is eternal.